We got an extra little installment of the Time Lord Victorious event that we may not have been expecting last week. I certainly wasn't, and initially I dismissed it, in the form of a very, very short little comic inside the comic creator Doctor Who app. So this week on the Canon update, I will be covering both that and, of course, the very first novel that is part of the event, The Night, the Fool and the Dead. Hi, I'm Phil. Welcome to the Time Lord Victorious Canon update. This is the series where I break down all the important bits of information we learn in kind of bullet point form from each of the Time Lord Victorious releases, so that, you know, if you're not getting every single one of the releases, you can still kind of track how it's interconnecting and where it's going on and how it ties in to the ones you are getting, because it's expensive to get them all. Really expensive, as my bank balance is finding out. Now, by the time this edition comes out, there will be more releases that have already come out that aren't covered in this edition, and that's because the book took me longer than last week to read, which is when it came out. It actually came out last week, not the week that's just finishing now. So it took me a little longer to finish that, and so I contemplated rolling that stuff in, and I think I said in the last video that I would roll that into the next video and just have a mammoth video. But there was so much to talk about in the book that I just thought it needed to be separate. So we're going to have the little comic, the book one, and the book in this one, and then next week, or the next edition, because it might, I'm going to try and get it out midweek, is going to be the first two audios, the Big Finish short trips, and the second and final issue of the Titan comic. I thought breaking it up into more manageable chunks like that would probably be better. So first up, we've got Tales of the Dark Times Episode 1 in the Comic Creator app. Now, I had originally dismissed the Comic Creator app tie-ins Time Lord Victorious as assuming that it would just be user-generated content, as that's kind of what my impression of the Comic Creator app is, that you have various different models to play with and you can create your own comics. I had never explored it before, that's just my impression of it that I had before this event. However, I then discovered that they actually were officially released mini comics within the app as well, that were written and produced by the creators of the app. And therefore, as they were releasing one with Time Lord Victorious, it technically, I guess, forms part of the story. So I better cover it. This short comic sees the Ood assassin Brian searching for his friend, the 10th Doctor, in a desert. And he saves him from these weird, glowy alien ghost things that are eating him. In this, we learn, or maybe relearn, it might have been I might have mentioned this in the annual as well when I covered that, but Brian really doesn't like his name. And also another thing we learn about him is that he only rarely kills his friends, so that's good, I suppose. Not killing your friends on a regular basis. This is the first story release we've had that actually includes Brian. As for where it takes place in the timeline of the event, 10 is in his Time Lord robes, so it definitely takes place after the first novel, which I'll get a little bit ahead of myself and tell you that he dons the robes at the end of that. When Brian finds the Doctor, he's apparently been stood in the desert for days, being eaten by these creatures, which Brian dispatches with a zap from his translator sphere. And at the end, the 10th Doctor dashes off saying he's going to do some good. And that's the end of the comic. I honestly don't know where this is going to fit in the overall story. Obviously, it's after the book. But is there going to be a space where 10 can disappear for 2 days and it makes sense that this is a canonical part of the Time Lord Victorious? I don't know, but just in case it does, I thought I better include it now. Now let's get on to the meat of this video. There is a lot to cover here. The Night, the Fool and the Dead, the very first novel of Time Lord Victorious. It's probably a good time to insert a reminder that I won't be detailing absolutely everything that will happen in the story. This isn't a beat by beat breakdown or anything like that. This is more of a summary of the important points that I think are important to know if you are following the event but not buying this particular release for whatever reason, be it money or availability or whatever. If you're not getting this, then these are the bullet points I think that might be useful for you to know, but it is by no means a absolutely 100% everything that happens in the story. I mean, if you're really interested in that, just buy the book, because it is a really good book. I would definitely recommend it, and you're missing out if you're not getting it. But if books aren't your thing or whatever, that's fine. That's why I'm here. But just be warned, there will be spoilers if you are planning on getting the book at some point. Obviously, I'm going to spoil things here. You've been warned. So as a little synopsis, the book finds the 10th Doctor already in the Dark Times, having got there, and I quote, through an obliging fracture in time. So we can assume that this is the time fracture from the immersive theatre event of the same name, Time Fracture, that will be going on in London next year, and that I've got tickets for, so I will definitely be covering that when I go. At first, he's just trying to get away from things, clear his head a little bit, so he's gone so far back just to have a bit of space, really. After the events of Waters of Mars, and also presumably after the events of the Titan comic, which we know from the timelines and the paths that they've released, 10th Doctor path that they've released on the official Time Lord Victorious website, that takes place before this in terms of the 10's timeline. So from his perspective, he's probably just had that just happened to him very recently, and fairly recently before that, the Waters of Mars stuff. Although he doesn't mention any of the events of the Titan comic that I picked up on. In this story, he is absolutely still struggling with the memories and partly the guilt of this Adelaide suicide in the Waters of Mars. We get several bits where he is flashing back, sort of PTSD flashbacks almost. He, takes him out of the moment and he's thinking about that. So it's still very recent and certainly affecting his psyche in this story. Very soon though, the planet that he's having a mooch around on gets visited by the Keturah. They judge its native inhabitants and effectively wipe them out. This appalls the Doctor and makes him vow to stop them. Now he teams up with a woman, a scientist, Phalamax, who has developed some kind of wearable tech. No, nothing like Google glasses. More of like a vest type thing that she thinks can repel the Keturah's effect on a species. He also teams up with the young girl who Phalamax uses to demonstrate the tech to potential buyers as they travel planet to planet. Brian the Ood Assassin also joins the team, having originally been hired to attack the girl by a third party in order to test the tech. Eventually in the story, the Doctor finds a way of using the tech and the crystals that power it to reflect the Keturah's energy back on them so that it bestows the Keturah's own gift of a lifespan on the Keturah themselves. However, just as the Doctor is about to destroy what he believes is the source of the Keturah's power, some surprise guests appear in the Dark Times and tell him that they're here to stop him. Last chance to get off before the really big spoiler train here. Still with me? That's right. First, the 8th Doctor appears on a Dalek saucer in league with the Daleks. Then, the 9th Doctor appears on a vampire coffin ship, both vowing to stop the 10th Doctor. And that's kind of where we end the story. Big cliffhanger for the next book. That's just a little quick synopsis of the really big important bullet points of what happens in the book. But we learn a lot about the Keturah, about a little bit about how what they're doing works, about the 10th Doctor, about the world of the Dark Times. We learn a lot about various different things which might play into the future of this event. So I guess as there's so much of it, I'd better just get on with it. Let's start with the Keturah. We've had descriptions of them before and we've had pictures of them before, but in this book the description differs slightly from what we've got before. Here there is reference to the tentacles being flesh, purple black like bruises, which doesn't exactly match the pictures we've seen of the more crystalline pinkish tentacles that we've both seen in the pictures and had described to us before. They also apparently have jellyfish eyes, whatever that means. At one point in the story, the Doctor even sees under the veil, and we get this description: graveyard eyes oozing rot, a black grimace, framing teeth like broken bones, deep etched symbols bleeding and stinking across the skin. Well, they sound like pleasant people to look at. We find out the Doctor had heard of the Keturah before as a boy, and that they apparently still existed in his, quote, own time. Whatever that counts as being. Just not the Dark Times, I guess. By the beginning of the story, more than 4,000 worlds have been visited by the Keturah, and they've been doing this over many years. They travel in fleets of ships, and they're described by one person as like a pandemic. Yay, topicality. One thing we find out during the story is that the Keturah have a sacred world, Mordella, said to hold the gateway between their dwelling place and the cosmos they're holding to account. Mordella itself is filled with crystals that are infused with power, the Mordella crystals. Mordella itself acts as a kind of conduit, a cipher, for the energies that the Keturah use to unleash their changes upon a species. There are markings on the walls in the caves in Mordella, and the Doctor almost is driven mad trying to read them. He's only really saved by Brian, who snaps him out of it with a bit of poison from his dangly bits. That sounds wrong. This is described as the wellspring of the Keturah design. The design being their plan for the universe. We still don't know where this design came from, if they originated it themselves, or if they've got it from some other source, but this is what it looks like in its raw form. Also in the cave are reanimated corpses of many species, referred to as the Revenants, who are reciting astro-temporal information, basically the coordinates of where planets will be at certain times and when the Keturah will judge them. After the Doctor is grabbed by one of the Keturah by the throat while trying to escape, the Doctor himself starts reciting some of these astro-temporal navigation things. Coordinates for a world that has already been judged, and yet the coordinates say that it will happen 5 days in the future. Brian speculates that this means that the Keturah have decided that they're going to judge the Doctor, or kill the Doctor at this point 5 days in the future on that planet. Now, interestingly, the Doctor refers to this era, the Dark Times, as aeons before his own civilization, which is odd, because we've seen that Gallifreyans do exist in the Dark Time. I mean, we've known that since the classic series anyway. They fought the vampires in the Dark Times. But we've also seen it within Time Lord Victorious itself. The Doctor Who magazine comic book, Monstrous Beauty, takes place amongst Gallifreyans. The first issue has the Ninth Doctor meeting these Dark Times Gallifreyans. So what's the deal there? Why is he saying this is aeons before his own civilization? I suppose it could be just that he's referring to them as a different civilization because they're not Time Lords yet. They have not yet discovered the Timeless Child. They have not yet developed the abilities of regeneration. They are just Gallifreyans, Shobogans, whatever you want to call them. They're not yet Time Lords, and therefore the 10th Doctor might consider them a different civilization. Now, a bit of information we have had before in some of the other entries, but that's reinforced here, is that the Dark Times races aren't immortal in the sense that they can't die. Many do by accidents. We've had that referenced in one of the pieces before, but also contradicted as well. In this story particularly, the Andalians die rarely, and their planet has 50 total people in a cemetery. One cemetery for the whole planet, and there's only 50 people in it. That is how little these people die. This aligns with what we found out in the Dawn of the Keturah short story that was released with the Doctor Who newsletter, but it does slightly contradict, or at least it seems to contradict, what's implied in Monstrous Beauty, the Doctor Who magazine comic, where the Gallifreyans via that are acting like death is a new thing to them, even via accidents. At least that's the impression I got. Now, Phalamax, who I mentioned earlier, is someone who has developed a wearable device called the Life Shroud, and she's taking it from planet to planet, trying to sell it on to the population, claiming that they will be able to protect themselves from the Keturah and from all death with it. She uses a young girl, Estine, to demonstrate this tech to the populations that she's trying to sell this to. Estine herself is a survivor from a Keturah attack, the one we saw in the prologue. She didn't die from that, she survived somehow. However, what we find out later on in the story is most of the vests don't work because they're missing a vital component. the Mordella crystals. Phalamax has been making robotic mining runs to Mordella to harvest those crystals, but only has enough for her own vest, which is keeping her safe from the Keturah. She doesn't have enough to distribute with the vest that she's selling on, so effectively she's running a con in order to get money to continue her research. In fairness, with the hope that she will be able to eventually develop the technology to save people from the Keturah eventually. However, that means that Estienne's vest that she uses in the demonstrations is also not actually working as the life shroud should to protect from the Keturah. And actually, the life shroud, we find out later on, doesn't protect from all types of death. It only protects from the Keturah's effect. And the reason for this is Estienne seems to have some kind of innate special kind of immortality, special for the Dark Times, where even accidents, even getting shot with a laser gun or something like that, doesn't kill her. She's immortal, sort of like, I suppose, Jack from Captain Jack in Torchwood. Phalamax theorizes that the Keturah bodies generate a charge that energizes the Mordella crystals, and then they direct that energy through all life on a planet in a genetic wave, and that's how they make these changes to these species and bestow life spans upon them. The life shrouds work by running a similar charge through the crystal in the vest, thereby counteracting the wave that the Keturah emit. Now let's talk about Brian, the Ood assassin. This is the first time that Brian has met the 10th Doctor. But it's not the first time that Brian has met the Doctor. Brian tells 10 that he's been in the TARDIS before, when he had its, quote, original owner. It looked different, he says, and mentions that it was what brought him to the Dark Times. He initially assumes that 10 killed that Doctor and assumed his identity, which I suppose kind of, I guess, in a way. So we can assume that Brian here is talking about the 8th Doctor, who we know from what we found out about upcoming releases, that he will be having an adventure with the 8th Doctor in the Big Finish adventures, which are coming, I think, next week. So we should get the first of those next week. Maybe we'll see this bit where Brian gets brought to the Dark Times with the 8th Doctor in that release next week. If it does, I will mention that in the Canon update, obviously. The 10th Doctor, however, does not remember this happening, presumably because this is about to become a multi-Doctor adventure, and multi-Doctor adventures tend to have this effect where people stop remembering stuff, although usually the most recent Doctor does remember it, so you'd think 10 would. Oh no, wait, no, 8 won't remember. I'm confusing myself here. Yes, 8 won't remember this happening afterwards because it's a multi-Doctor adventure featuring the 10th Doctor. Does that make sense? I think I'm making sense. In my own head, I'm making sense. The Doctor manages to adapt Phalamax's design to not only counteract the Keturah wave, but to reflect it back at them, thereby affecting the Keturah with their own gift. By the end of the novel, this has happened. He has done this, he has affected the Keturah are dying. And oh yeah, Brian has managed to get him a mercenary space fleet, which initially he says he doesn't want, because he doesn't want an army, but he ends up using to go to Mordella with the plan to destroy the whole place, wipe the Keturah off the map completely, and any chance that any other species will use these crystals in the future to do a similar thing. Dons his Time Lord robes to become the admiral of this fleet and orders them to fire. And then our special guests turn up. 8th Doctor arrives on a Dalek saucer. 9th Doctor arrives on a vampire coffin ship. They communicate and say they vow to stop him. He says, basically, screw you. And that's the cliffhanger. We'll find out what happens immediately next in the next novel, which is out in December by Una McCormack. All Flesh is Grass, I believe it is called. So we've got a couple of months wait for that. But I imagine in the meantime, we're going to get the stories of the 8th and 9th Doctor leading up to this point. So we've got the 8th Doctor audios, which are coming, as I've already mentioned, where we've started the 9th Doctor comics in Doctor Who magazine. He's already in the Dark Times and is, up against the vampires. So we'll probably, the end of those two, the end of the 9th Doctor comic and some point in the 8th Doctor audios, we're going to reach a point where they arrive at this point. I imagine that will be the end of one of the audios to the 8th Doctor and probably the end of the 3 issues of the comic for the 9th Doctor. And there you go. I think that's all the important stuff. There was a lot there, which is why this video is a bit later than I would have liked it to have been. It's sort of a week late, basically, which is going to have a knock-on effect for the next one as well. So the next Canon update will be covering some stuff that's already out at this point, which is the 2 short trips from Big Finish featuring the Master, 2 different versions of the Master, and the final issue of the Titan comics as well. Defender of the Daleks. Those are already out, so go get them if you can and if you are interested in that. But if not, I will be covering them in the next edition of the Canon update, which will hopefully be out maybe in a few days' time if I get my if I get my ass in gear. Look for it around midweek, hopefully. Fingers crossed. If you've missed the previous Canon updates, I've compiled them into a handy playlist, so I'll leave the link up in a card there and also in the thingamajig down below, so you can check those out. We've got 3. This is the 4th issue, so there's 3 already in there, and in addition to this one. And if you found this useful, if this series is being useful to you, please do share it around your social internets and so other people that may find it useful also find it. That would be much appreciated. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, all that jazz, all the usual stuff. And I will see you for the next Canon update, hopefully in a few days' time. See you then. Bye.